London, 1845. Flora Fairchild knew precisely what society thought of her. At 27, unmarried and without notable beauty or fortune, she had long since been relegated to the shadowy corners of ballrooms and the uncomfortable chairs at dinner parties. Not that she attended many these days. The word spinster had attached itself to her name like an unwelcome prefix, usually accompanied by plain, or, on kinder days, sensible. This particular afternoon, Flora sat in the modest drawing-room of her cousin's townhouse, needlework in hand, listening to the excited chatter of her younger relatives. The season was approaching, and 17-year-old Georgiana could speak of nothing else. "Mamma says the Duke of Montford will be in attendance at Lady Hertford's ball," Georgiana gushed, twirling around the room. "They say he's finally searching for a bride after all these years." The Duke, Flora's aunt, Mrs. Harrington, looked up from her correspondence. "Well, that will certainly set the mammas aflutter. A duke, still unwed at 35, and with that fortune. I dare say every eligible young lady will be paraded before him." Flora's fingers moved mechanically over her embroidery. Marcus Ellsworth, the Duke of Montford. She had known him once, before he inherited the dukedom, before she had faded into social obscurity. Their paths had crossed briefly during her first season, when hope still colored her view of society. She remembered a serious young man with thoughtful eyes, who had once rescued her dance card when it had fallen, and who had surprised her with his knowledge of botany during a conversation in a garden. But that was 10 years ago. Before her father's death had left their family in reduced circumstances, before she had come to live with her cousins as a dependent relation, filling the uncomfortable role between family member and servant. "Flora, you'll be joining us, of course," her aunt said, though the words lacked any genuine enthusiasm. "Thank you, Aunt, but I believe I shall remain home. The household accounts need attention, and Georgiana's new gowns require final adjustments." Her cousin pouted. "Oh, but Flora, you must come. Who else will help me remember all the gentlemen's names?" Flora smiled gently. "You'll manage beautifully without me." Later that evening, alone in her small bedchamber, Flora stood before the mirror. She was not, despite society's assessment, truly plain. Her features were well proportioned, her complexion clear, her hazel eyes intelligent. But she had never mastered the art of drawing attention to herself, of sparkling in conversation or employing the strategic fan-fluttering that seemed to come naturally to other young women. What truly rendered her invisible was not her appearance but her circumstance. A woman without fortune, without parents to champion her, and now past the age when society deemed her marriageable. She had built walls around her heart, fashioned from the repeated disappointments of watching younger, wealthier girls claim the attention she once hoped for. "Love and marriage are luxuries for those with fortune and connections," she whispered to her reflection. "Contentment must be enough for the rest of us." She had convinced herself of this truth, had arranged her life around it. Her days were structured around making herself useful. Managing the household, tutoring her young cousins, completing the endless small tasks that maintained a respectable household. If she occasionally dreamed of more, of conversation that stimulated her mind, of a partner who might see beyond her circumstances, she banished such thoughts as dangerous indulgences. 2 weeks later, despite her protests, Flora found herself attending Lady Hertford's ball. Her gown, refashioned from one of her aunt's cast-offs, was several seasons out of date, its pale blue silk lacking the elaborate trimmings that adorn the current fashions. She had dressed her own hair in a simple style, adding a borrowed silver clip as her only ornament. "Remember to stay near Georgiana," her aunt instructed as their carriage approached the brightly lit mansion. "Lord Pemberton's son has shown interest, and we mustn't let the connection cool." "Yes, Aunt," Flora replied, adjusting her cousin's shawl. "I'll ensure she has every opportunity to shine." The ballroom blazed with hundreds of candles, illuminating silk gowns and jewels that caught the light like stars. Flora guided Georgiana through the crowd, making introductions where needed, then retreated to the periphery of the room. Here, among the chaperons and older matrons, she could observe without drawing attention. Her eyes, almost of their own accord, sought out the Duke of Montford. He stood near the center of the room, surrounded by eager introductions. The years had changed him. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader, his face more defined. The serious young man had become imposing, his expression guarded as he surveyed the room with evident detachment. "Appraising the merchandise, is he?" came a sharp voice beside her. Flora turned to see Mrs. Whittington, a notorious gossip, fanning herself vigorously. "I beg your pardon." "The Duke," Mrs. Whittington nodded toward him. "Everyone knows he's shopping for a duchess this season. His grandmother is in poor health, and she's demanded he secure the succession before she passes. The betting books at White's are filled with wagers on which young lady he'll choose." "How mercenary that sounds," Flora murmured. "Marriage among the nobility is always a business transaction, my dear, particularly for a man in his position." The woman leaned closer. "They say he nearly offered for Lady Caroline Blackwell last season, but withdrew when he discovered her family's debts. Cold as ice, that one, calculating to his core." Flora watched as a procession of young ladies was presented to the Duke. Each smiled brilliantly, curtsied gracefully, and attempted to engage him in conversation. His responses appeared polite but brief. "Excuse me," Flora said, suddenly needing fresher air. She slipped through the crowd toward the terrace doors. The night air offered blessed relief from the overheated ballroom. She moved to the stone balustrade, gazing out at the moonlit garden below. "Seeking escape, Miss Fairchild." The deep voice startled her. She turned to find the Duke of Montford standing several feet away, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "Your Grace," she curtsied, surprise evident in her voice. "You remember me?" "Of course." He stepped closer, the moonlight revealing his features. "We discussed the medicinal properties of foxglove in Lady Richmond's garden, as I recall. You had rather strong opinions about its proper cultivation." Flora felt heat rise to her cheeks. That was 10 years ago. 9 years and 7 months, if we're being precise. His lips curved slightly. "I have an excellent memory. I'm surprised Your Grace would recall such a trivial conversation." "It was hardly trivial. You corrected my understanding of soil composition quite thoroughly." He joined her at the balustrade. "I find that genuine knowledge makes a far stronger impression than the usual ballroom pleasantries." Flora studied him, trying to reconcile this man with the cold, calculating figure described by Mrs. Whittington. His posture remained formal, but something in his eyes suggested weariness rather than arrogance. "Are you enjoying the evening, Your Grace?" she asked. Enduring would be a more accurate term. He glanced back toward the ballroom. "This process of selecting a duchess is rather like being paraded through Smithfield Market as prize livestock." The blunt assessment startled a laugh from her. "I imagine the young ladies feel similarly examined." "No doubt," he turned back to her. "Yet here you are, removed from the exhibition. Are you not participating in the marriage market this season, Miss Fairchild?" "I am well past my prime years for the market, Your Grace. At my age and station, I attend merely as companion to my cousin." She kept her tone light, practiced in disguising the sting of such acknowledgments. "Your age," his brow furrowed. "You cannot be above 28. 27. Ancient by marriage market standards." "Then we are both relics," he said dryly. "I at 35 am practically fossilized." This drew another smile from Flora. "The difference, Your Grace, is that men age like fine wine, while women are treated as hothouse flowers, wilting past their first bloom." The Duke studied her face, his expression thoughtful. "An apt metaphor, though I've always preferred the steady reliability of perennials to the fleeting beauty of hothouse blooms." Before Flora could respond, her aunt's voice called from the doorway. "Flora, there you are. Georgiana requires your assistance immediately." Flora curtsied quickly to the Duke. "If you'll excuse me, Your Grace." "Of course," he replied, inclining his head. "It was a pleasure to renew our acquaintance, Miss Fairchild." As she hurried back into the ballroom, Flora sternly reminded herself not to attach any significance to the encounter. Men of his rank conversed with many people. It meant nothing beyond momentary relief from tedium for him. To imagine otherwise would be foolish. The following week brought an unexpected invitation to a botanical exhibition at Kew Gardens, extended to the entire Harrington family. "The Duke of Montford's name is on the invitation," her aunt remarked, eyebrows raised. How curious. We're hardly in his usual social circle. Perhaps he's inviting much of society, Flora suggested, ignoring the sudden quickening of her pulse. Perhaps, her aunt replied, though her speculative gaze rested on Georgiana. Well, we shall certainly attend. Georgiana, we must select your most becoming walking dress. The day of the exhibition arrived bright and clear. The gardens were resplendent with spring blooms, the newly constructed glasshouses gleaming in the sunlight. Several aristocratic families strolled the paths, admiring exotic specimens from across the British Empire. Flora had fallen slightly behind her family group, pausing to examine a particularly interesting orchid, when a familiar voice spoke beside her. The Vanda coerulia, the Duke said, native to the Khasi hills in India, quite difficult to cultivate in our climate. Hence the glasshouse, Flora replied, glancing up at him. Though I wonder if they've properly replicated the humidity levels. The leaves show signs of stress. The Duke's eyebrows rose. Your knowledge extends beyond European flora, I see. I had access to an excellent library before my father's passing, she explained. Botanical texts were my particular fascination. They walked together down the path, discussing various specimens. Flora gradually relaxed, forgetting for a moment the disparity in their stations as they debated the classification of a newly discovered fern species. You disagree with Linnaeus's system? The Duke asked, genuine interest in his voice. Not entirely, but I find his emphasis on reproductive structures sometimes overlooks important physiological similarities, Flora replied. Though I hesitate to challenge such an established authority. The greatest scientific minds began by questioning established authorities, he said. Progress depends upon it. They rounded a bend in the path and came upon the rest of the Harrington party. Her aunt's eyes widened at the sight of Flora deep in conversation with the Duke. Your Grace, Mrs. Harrington curtsied deeply. How kind of you to escort my niece. Miss Fairchild has been educating me on the shortcomings of Linnaean taxonomy, the Duke replied, his formal manner returning. May I present the specimens in the tropical house to your party? They are particularly fine this season. What followed was a carefully orchestrated promenade, with Mrs. Harrington maneuvering Georgiana to walk beside the Duke. Flora fell back, watching as her cousin smiled and nodded at whatever the Duke was saying. Yet she noticed his gaze occasionally finding hers across the group, particularly when discussing points of botanical interest that had arisen in their previous conversation. On the carriage ride home, her aunt was practically glowing with satisfaction. Did you see how attentive his Grace was to Georgiana, asking about her musical studies, commenting on her appreciation of the lilies? Flora remained silent, aware that the Duke had directed those questions to her cousin only after discovering Flora's own limited musical education during their private conversation. If he's truly seeking a bride this season, her aunt continued, Georgiana could make a most advantageous match. A duchess at 17, just think of it. Flora thought instead of the way the Duke's eyes had lit up during their debate about plant classification, how his formal reserve had momentarily given way to genuine engagement. But such observations were dangerous, leading to hopes that had no place in her carefully ordered existence. He seemed most impressed with the conservatory, she said neutrally. The orchid collection is apparently quite renowned. 3 days later, a messenger arrived at the Harrington home bearing a package addressed to Miss Flora Fairchild. Inside was a leather-bound volume on tropical botany, recently published and difficult to obtain. The accompanying note read simply, "For continued debates on taxonomy, Montford." Flora stared at the book, her fingers tracing the embossed title. What's that? Her aunt entered the sitting room, eyes immediately fixing on the package. A book from the Duke of Montford, Flora replied, unable to hide her surprise. On botanical classification. Mrs. Harrington's expression shifted from curiosity to calculation. How unusual. I suppose it relates to your conversation at Kew. Yes, we discussed Linnaeus's system. Well, her aunt pursed her lips. You must write and thank him, of course, and perhaps mention Georgiana's anticipation of the Pemberton musical evening next week, where we expect his Grace will be in attendance. Flora nodded, though the instruction left a bitter taste. The book represented the first time in years someone had acknowledged her intellectual interests, had seen beyond her role as the plain, dependent cousin. Yet even this small recognition was to be leveraged for Georgiana's prospects. That evening she wrote 2 notes. The first, the official family response, properly expressed gratitude and included the suggested reference to Georgiana's musical anticipation. The second, which she never intended to send, expressed her genuine appreciation for a gift that recognized her mind rather than her marriageability. To her surprise, the Duke appeared at the Pemberton musical evening, and even more surprisingly, sought her out during the interval between performances. "Did you receive the book, Miss Fairchild?" he asked, his tall figure drawing curious glances from nearby guests. "I did, Your Grace. It was most thoughtful." She kept her voice low, aware of watching eyes. "Though I fear such specialized knowledge is of little practical use to someone in my position." "Knowledge is never without use," he replied, and I found myself wanting to continue our discussion. Before she could respond, Lady Pemberton approached, steering her daughter toward them. "Your Grace, you must hear Miss Pemberton play. She has been studying with Vienna's finest instructors." The Duke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he bowed with perfect courtesy. "I would be delighted." As he was led away, he glanced back at Flora, something like regret in his expression. The following weeks brought a series of unexpected encounters. The Duke appeared at gatherings where the Harringtons were present, invariably finding a few moments to speak with Flora, despite her aunt's increasingly obvious efforts to position Georgiana in his path. Each conversation revealed more complexity to the man's society, viewed as coldly pragmatic. He spoke of his estates with genuine concern for tenant welfare, discussed books they had both read, and even shared his frustration with the performative nature of the marriage market. "My grandmother believes I require a young, biddable bride who will revitalize the family line and cause no complications," he told Flora during a brief moment alone in the library at a house party. "Society expects me to choose based on bloodlines and dowry. Neither seems concerned with whether I might desire a partner capable of intelligent conversation." "Surely you can find both qualities combined," Flora suggested. "There are many accomplished young ladies who would make suitable duchesses." "Suitable," he turned the word as if examining it. "There's a chasm between suitable and desirable, Miss Fairchild." His gaze held hers for a moment too long, sending an unwelcome flutter through her chest. Flora had become dangerously accustomed to these conversations, to being seen and heard by him. Each encounter chipped away at the protective walls she had built around her expectations. Society had begun to notice. Whispers followed Flora at gatherings. Why did the Duke seek her company? Was he using the plain spinster as cover for some other intrigue? Perhaps he was merely exploiting her connection to the prettier, younger cousin. "You must be careful, Flora," her aunt warned one evening. "People are beginning to talk, and such talk could damage Georgiana's prospects if they believe you are setting your cap at the Duke." "I assure you I harbor no such delusions," Flora replied stiffly. "Good. Because while His Grace may find your conversation diverting, a man in his position would never seriously consider someone of your circumstances." The words, though expected, still strung. Flora knew their truth, had built her life around such realities. Yet the Duke's attention had awakened dangerous hopes she thought long buried. The season's defining moment arrived with the Duchess of Richmond's midsummer ball. Flora attended in a gown she had painstakingly remade, adding fresh trim to disguise its age. The ballroom blazed with candlelight, the elite of society gathered in their finest attire. She was standing near the refreshment table when the Duke approached, looking uncommonly determined. "Miss Fairchild, would you honor me with a dance?" A hush fell over those nearby. The Duke of Montford rarely danced, and never with unmarried ladies unless showing particular interest. "Your Grace, Flora hesitated, aware of the attention they were attracting. "I'm not certain that would be wise." "Nevertheless, I am asking." He extended his hand. Unable to refuse without causing a scene, Flora placed her hand in his and allowed him to lead her onto the dance floor. As they took their positions for the quadrille, she could feel dozens of eyes upon them. You've created quite a stir, Your Grace, she murmured as they moved through the first figures of the dance. Good. Perhaps it will discourage the matchmaking mamas for a few minutes. His hand briefly clasped hers as they circled each other. You look troubled, Miss Fairchild. I'm concerned about appearances, she admitted. My aunt fears your attention might be misconstrued. By whom? By me, Flora said quietly. Or by society, which will wonder why a duke is dancing with a spinster of no particular fortune or beauty. The duke's expression darkened. Is that how you see yourself? It's how society sees me. I've made peace with it. Have you, I wonder? His voice lowered. Because I see a woman of remarkable intelligence, quiet strength, and genuine beauty that has nothing to do with fashion or superficial ornamentation. Flora missed a step, causing a small collision with a neighboring couple. She apologized quickly, her composure shaken by his words. Your Grace, please, she whispered. Such compliments are unnecessary and potentially harmful. On the contrary, they are both necessary and truthful, he replied, guiding her through the next movement. I have spent the season surrounded by young women trained to display every socially desirable quality while revealing nothing of themselves. You are the only person with whom I can have a genuine conversation. The dance ended before she could formulate a response. As he escorted her back to the side of the room, he spoke again. Would you walk with me in the garden? There is a matter I wish to discuss privately. Every instinct warned against it. Yet Flora found herself nodding, allowing him to guide her toward the terrace doors. They walked in silence until they reached a small stone bench partially concealed by flowering shrubs. Miss Fairchild, Flora, the Duke began, his usual composure seemingly shaken. I have not been entirely forthright about my intentions this season. Flora's heart thumped painfully against her ribs. In what way, Your Grace? My grandmother's health is indeed failing, and she has pressed me to secure the succession. But her ideas about suitable candidates and mine have diverged significantly. He paced before her, uncharacteristically agitated. The truth is, I began this season believing marriage would be, at best, a practical arrangement. Then I encountered you again. Me, Flora's voice was barely audible. You, he stopped before her. The conversation we had on that terrace weeks ago reminded me of our previous meeting years before, of the impression you had made then. Every subsequent encounter has only confirmed what I began to suspect. That in you I might find not just a suitable duchess, but a genuine partner. Flora stood, needing to create distance between them. Your Grace, if this is some kind of jest. I have never been more serious, he caught her hand. I know this is sudden and unexpected. I know society will be shocked, but I find I do not care. Flora Fairchild, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. This could not be happening, not to her, not after she had resigned herself to spinsterhood and dependence. This is impossible, she whispered. Your family would never accept such a match. A woman of my age, with no dowry, no connections. I am not asking my family to marry you, he said firmly. I am asking you to marry me. As for connections, the dukedom supplies plenty for both of us. But why? Why would you choose me when you could have any young lady in society? Because when I imagine sharing my life, my home, my thoughts with someone for the next 30 years, yours is the only company I can envision without feeling trapped. He stepped closer. Because you see me as Marcus, not just as Montford. Because when you speak of plants or books or ideas, your eyes light with a passion that makes you the most beautiful woman in any room. Flora turned away, overwhelmed by emotions she had forbidden herself to feel for years. I fear you will regret this impulsive decision. I am many things, Flora, but impulsive has never been among them. I have observed you carefully for months. I have considered this from every angle. His voice softened. The only question remaining is whether you could consider me as a husband. Consider you, she laughed shakily. Your Grace, Marcus, any woman would be fortunate beyond measure to receive such an offer. I'm not asking any woman. I'm asking you, with your sharp mind and quiet strength, could you envision yourself as my duchess? As my partner? Flora closed her eyes, searching herself for the truth. Beyond the shock, beyond the practical considerations, what did she feel for this man? The answer came with surprising clarity. Yes, she said simply. Though I still believe you may be making a grave error in judgment. Then it is my error to make. He lifted her hand to his lips, and I have never felt more certain of any decision. They returned to the ballroom separately, having agreed to follow proper protocols despite their private understanding. The Duke would call upon her aunt the following day to make his intentions official. Flora moved through the remainder of the evening in a daze, scarcely able to believe what had transpired. When she finally returned home, she sat before her small mirror, examining her reflection as if expecting to see some visible transformation. "This cannot be real," she whispered to herself. "By tomorrow, he will have reconsidered." But the following morning brought the Duke's carriage to their door at the earliest acceptable hour. Flora remained upstairs during his interview with her aunt and uncle, her stomach twisting with anxiety. When she was finally summoned to the drawing room, she found her aunt looking pale with shock, her uncle beaming with undisguised satisfaction. "Miss Fairchild," the Duke rose as she entered, his expression softening at the sight of her. "Your aunt and uncle have graciously given their consent to our marriage." "Though we are naturally surprised," her aunt added, her voice strained. "Such an unexpected honor for our family." The engagement was announced the following day in the Morning Post, creating precisely the sensation they had anticipated. Society was scandalized. The Duke of Montford, one of England's most eligible bachelors, had chosen as his bride not a debutante from a prestigious family, but a 27 spinster of modest means and unremarkable lineage. Rumors flourished. She must be with child. She had entrapped him somehow. It was a marriage of convenience to cover some scandal. No one could believe that the calculating Duke had chosen her freely for herself alone. "They're saying the most dreadful things," Georgiana reported, wide-eyed after returning from a morning call. "Lady Pemberton implied you had used some sort of feminine wiles to ensnare his grace." "I assure you, my feminine wiles consist entirely of discussions about plant taxonomy and literary criticism," Flora replied dryly, though the gossip wounded her more than she cared to admit. The Duke himself appeared impervious to the speculation. He called daily, brought her books rather than flowers, and spoke openly of their future together. With each visit, Flora's initial disbelief gradually gave way to cautious joy. Perhaps this extraordinary turn of events was not a dream or a mistake after all. 3 weeks into their engagement, however, the Dowager Duchess of Montford arrived in London from the family's country estate. Her first action was to summon Flora to her residence. "I should accompany you," Marcus insisted when Flora showed him the imperious note. "No," Flora said firmly, "this is a conversation I must have alone. Your grandmother deserves the opportunity to express her concerns directly to me." The Dowager's townhouse was an imposing edifice in Mayfair, its interiors reflecting generations of aristocratic wealth. Flora was shown into a formal drawing room where an elegant, white-haired woman sat rigidly upright in a brocade chair. "Miss Fairchild," the Dowager's voice was as crisp as her appearance, "please be seated." Flora curtsied and took the offered chair, maintaining the composed demeanor she had practiced for this meeting. "I shall come directly to the point," the older woman said. "This engagement has shocked society, and with good reason. My grandson occupies one of the oldest dukedoms in England. His choice of bride affects not merely his own life, but the future of our family line. I understand the significance of his position, Your Grace." "Do you? Then perhaps you can explain why a sensible woman of your age and background would accept a proposal that places you so far above your natural station." The question was designed to wound, but Flora had anticipated worse. "I accepted because your grandson honored me with his regard, and because I believe we are well suited in temperament and interests." "Temperament and interests," the Dowager repeated. "How modern." "In my day, marriages among the nobility were arranged based on bloodlines and connections. Love was a pleasant addition if it developed, but hardly a prerequisite." "Times change, Your Grace." "Not that much," the Dowager's piercing gaze assessed her. "I have made inquiries about you, Miss Fairchild. Your father was a respectable gentleman who mismanaged his modest estate. You have lived as a dependent relation for the past 8 years. You have no fortune, no particular accomplishments, and your family connections are unremarkable at best. Each statement fell like a blow, articulating the very reasons Flora had initially resisted Marcus's proposal. Those facts are correct, she acknowledged. Then you must understand my concern. What does a woman in your position bring to this marriage that would benefit the Montford legacy? Flora took a steadying breath. I bring myself, your grace. My judgment, my loyalty, my willingness to learn the responsibilities of the position. I bring a commitment to being a true partner to your grandson in managing his estates and continuing his family's traditions. Admirable sentiments, but hardly sufficient. The Dowager leaned forward. I shall be direct, Miss Fairchild. I am prepared to offer you a substantial settlement, enough to establish your independence comfortably for the rest of your life, if you will release my grandson from this engagement. Though Flora had half expected such an offer, the reality of it still staggered her. You believe I can be bought off. I believe you are a practical woman who understands that this marriage will subject you to scrutiny and criticism, for which you are ill-prepared. Society can be cruel to those who rise above their station through marriage. As Duchess, every decision you make, every gown you wear, every word you speak will be judged against the standards of generations of aristocratic breeding. The assessment was painfully accurate. Flora had lain awake many nights imagining the challenges she would face as Duchess. Furthermore, the Dowager continued, Marcus requires heirs. At your age, childbearing becomes more difficult and dangerous. A younger bride would. With respect, your grace, Flora interrupted, finding strength in indignation. My age is hardly advanced beyond childbearing years, and my health is excellent. As for society's judgment, I have endured its dismissal and derision for years as the plain spinster cousin. I imagine I shall manage equally well as the unsuitable Duchess. The Dowager's eyebrows rose at this show of spirit. You genuinely care for my grandson. I love him, Flora said simply. Not his title, not his fortune, but him, his mind, his principles, his quiet strength. If he were a country parson instead of a duke, I would still choose him without hesitation. A long silence followed this declaration. The Dowager studied her with an intensity that seemed to peer directly into her soul. My grandson has always been stubbornly independent in his judgments, she said finally. When he was a boy of 10, he adopted a 3-legged hound that everyone insisted was worthless. That dog became the finest hunting companion on the estate. Marcus saw value where others saw only flaws. Flora wasn't sure whether to be flattered or offended by the comparison to a 3-legged dog, but she remained silent. I still believe this marriage is a mistake, the Dowager continued, but I recognize the steel in your character, Miss Fairchild. Perhaps that at least makes you worthy of the Montford name. It was hardly a blessing, but it wasn't an outright rejection either. Flora left the meeting emotionally exhausted, but resolute. The Dowager's opposition was exactly what she had expected, what any reasonable person would expect when a man of Marcus's position chose someone like her. She told Marcus about the meeting that evening as they walked in the garden of her aunt's home, carefully chaperoned but afforded a modicum of privacy. She offered you money to cry off. His face darkened with anger. That is unconscionable. It was entirely predictable, Flora countered. In her position, I might have done the same. You're defending her. I'm understanding her. She seeks to protect what she values most, your family's legacy and your personal happiness. She believes I threaten both. Marcus took her hands, his expression earnest. And what did you tell her? That I love you, Flora said simply. That I would choose you without your title or fortune. That I cannot be bought. The transformation of his expression, from tension to wonder, was like watching the sun emerge from behind clouds. Flora Fairchild, he said softly, you continue to astonish me. Is that a good thing for a future Duchess? It is an essential thing for my wife, he kissed her hand. The ceremony cannot come soon enough. Their wedding was set for late autumn, a compromise between Marcus's desire for a swift ceremony and society's expectations for a ducal marriage. The intervening months proved challenging. Invitations that would normally be extended to a duke's fiancée were conspicuously absent. Former acquaintances who had barely acknowledged Flora's existence now scrutinized her mercilessly. Modistes who had previously treated her as an afterthought suddenly fawned over her, while whispering behind her back. Through it all, Marcus remained steadfast. He escorted her to the required social functions, commissioned a renowned portrait artist to paint her, and made a point of consulting her on matters relating to the various Montford properties. "You're involving me in these decisions to prove a point to society," she observed one afternoon as they reviewed plans for renovations to the main estate. "I'm involving you because your judgment is sound and your taste impeccable," he corrected. "That it happens to demonstrate your capabilities to others is a secondary benefit." As the wedding approached, Flora found herself spending increasing time with the dowager, who had appointed herself instructor in the ways of the aristocracy. Their relationship remained complex. The older woman never quite approved of her, but seemed determined to ensure she would not embarrass the family name. "The Montford sapphires have adorned every duchess for 2 centuries, the dowager explained, opening a velvet case to reveal a magnificent necklace. "You will wear them at your wedding, and at all significant state occasions thereafter." "They're beautiful," Flora said, awed by the historic pieces. "They are more than beautiful. They are symbols of the family's enduring legacy." The dowager closed the case. "A legacy you will now help to preserve and extend." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Flora stood in her chamber at her aunt's house, being dressed in a gown of ivory silk with delicate lace that had cost more than her entire previous wardrobe. Her hair was arranged with pearl pins, and the Montford sapphires gleamed at her throat. "I still can't quite believe this is happening," she confessed to her maid. "Begging your pardon, miss," the young woman replied, adjusting the veil, "but I can. The Duke looks at you like you've hung the moon and stars." "It's proper romantic, it is." St. George's Church in Hanover Square was filled to capacity, society's curiosity overcoming any reservations about the match. As Flora walked down the aisle on her uncle's arm, she heard the whispers, saw the assessing glances. For a moment, doubt threatened to overwhelm her. Then she saw Marcus waiting at the altar, his expression transforming as he beheld her. In that moment, the whispers faded to insignificance. "You are breathtaking," he whispered as she reached his side. "And you are certain," she whispered back, "this is your final chance to escape." "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." Their vows were spoken clearly, without hesitation. When the clergyman pronounced them husband and wife, Flora felt a sense of completion she had never expected to experience. This man, this thoughtful, principled, remarkable man, had chosen her, not despite her circumstances, but because of the person those circumstances had shaped her to be. The wedding breakfast that followed was a lavish affair at Montford House. Flora moved through the crowd of aristocratic guests with newfound confidence, no longer the overlooked spinster, but the Duchess of Montford. She overheard fragments of conversation that ranged from grudging admiration to continued skepticism. "She carries herself rather well, considering. The Duke seems genuinely besotted. A love match, they say. How extraordinary. It won't last. These misalliances never do." The Dowager Duchess approached as Flora stood momentarily alone, observing the gathering. "You have surprised them all by not appearing overawed or grasping," the older woman said. "Good. The first rule of our position is never to reveal uncertainty." "Is that approval I detect, Your Grace?" Flora asked. "Let us call it cautious optimism." The dowager's stern expression softened slightly. "My grandson has chosen you above all others, and he is not a man to make such decisions lightly. Perhaps he sees something in you that others have overlooked." "Including yourself." "Including myself," the dowager acknowledged. "Though I reserve the right to remain vigilant until you produce an heir." Flora laughed, surprising them both. "I would expect nothing less." Later that evening, as their carriage carried them toward Montford's country estate for their wedding trip, Flora nestled against her husband's side. "Are you happy, my Duchess?" he asked, his arm warm around her shoulders. "Extraordinarily so," she replied, "though I suspect society will continue to wonder what you saw in your plain spinster bride." Then society is blind as well as foolish. He tipped her chin up to meet his gaze. What I saw, what I continue to see, is a woman of remarkable intelligence, quiet courage, and genuine beauty. A woman who sees me clearly and loves me anyway. A woman who will make not just a fine duchess, but an exceptional wife. I will strive to be worthy of your faith in me, Flora promised. You already are, he kissed her gently. We have defied expectations, my love. Now we shall exceed them. As the carriage continued through the gathering dusk, Flora reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. Society had labelled her a plain spinster, dismissing her as unremarkable and unworthy of notice. Yet this man, this duke who could have chosen anyone, had seen beyond those labels to the person beneath. In doing so, he had not only transformed her circumstances, but had awakened her to possibilities she had forced herself to abandon. Love, partnership, family, all the things she had convinced herself were luxuries beyond her reach, now lay before her like an unexplored country. She had entered the season believing that love and marriage were only for those with fortune and beauty. She ended it understanding that the heart recognizes value that society often overlooks, and that true partnership depends not on external circumstances, but on the genuine meeting of minds and spirits. The plain spinster had indeed stunned society by becoming a duchess, but the greater transformation was within herself, in her newfound belief that she was, and had always been, worthy of being truly seen and deeply loved.